Aurelius Thorne, the city's most feared art critic, believes art is a cold, objective science, not a messy expression of feeling. His world is shattered when he publicly eviscerates the heartfelt drawing of 13-year-old Naomi Johnson, calling it a sentimental mistake. But the critic's harsh words are swiftly and spectacularly undone when a prestigious Parisian gallery offers a multi-million-dollar deal for the very same piece, sparking a seismic clash between old-world arrogance and the power of a young, authentic voice. If you liked the video and have subscribed to my channel, let's move on to our story. Enjoy watching. Aurelius Thorne's apartment was less a home and more a meticulously curated gallery of his own genius. Every surface of his penthouse, perched atop one of Manhattan's glassy skyscrapers, gleamed with an almost aggressive perfection. The walls were a sterile, gallery white, serving as a silent backdrop for a Rothko print that commanded one wall and a rare, deconstructed sculpture by Jean Tingley that perpetually trembled on a polished ebony pedestal. Aurelius himself was a living extension of this aesthetic, a man built from sharp angles and expensive fabrics. His face was a chiseled mask of perpetual disappointment, an expression he had cultivated over decades as the city's most formidable and feared art critic. To be praised by Aurelius was to be anointed, to be dismissed was to be erased from the cultural landscape. He did not see art as a thing of passion or raw emotion. He saw it as a science, a history, a lineage. A work was either a worthy successor to the masters of old, a flawless execution of established technique, or it was nothing more than an amateur's folly. He was a gatekeeper, not a facilitator, and he took immense pride in his ability to spot a true masterpiece from a mile away and, more importantly, to eviscerate a fraud with a single cutting remark. The art world, he believed, needed his cold, objective hand to guide it, to prevent the chaotic mess of human feeling from tainting its hallowed halls. His latest column, titled The Fading Brush, a lament for modern incoherence, was poised to be his magnum opus, a searing indictment of what he considered the modern art world's slip into childish, unskilled expression. He had spent weeks on it, meticulously crafting each sentence like a miniature sculpture, ensuring every word was a poison dart aimed at the heart of mediocrity. Today, however, was a nuisance. He was scheduled to attend the city's annual Rising Stars art show, a charity event meant to showcase works from local schools. Aurelius hated these events. They were a parade of clumsy charcoal drawings and poorly proportioned clay sculptures, a saccharine celebration of effort over talent. He went only as a favor to a patron, a necessary evil to maintain his access to the truly valuable collections. He adjusted the cuff of his bespoke suit jacket, the silk a cool, smooth protest against the warm afternoon sun streaming through his floor-to-ceiling windows. He sighed, a low, frustrated sound. He had a few more hours before he had to descend into that maelstrom of amateurism. He picked up his phone, the screen lighting up with a message from his assistant confirming his attendance. He put the phone down, feeling a familiar wave of detached cynicism. Nothing at that show would be of any consequence. Miles away, in a part of the city Aurelius only ever flew over, a different world entirely was coming to life. Naomi Johnson's world was a symphony of controlled chaos. The apartment she shared with her mother was vibrant, filled with the hum of life and the clatter of everyday existence. Sunlight didn't just stream through the windows, it danced with the dust motes and illuminated the crayon marks on the walls from when she was small. Her room was a creative explosion. Sketchbooks were piled on the floor, their pages overflowing with a universe of her own making. Watercolors, acrylics, and oil pastels were scattered across her desk, their caps perpetually lost, their colors smeared together on the palettes like miniature galaxies. At 13, Naomi had discovered that her hands could translate the complicated jumble of emotions in her heart onto paper. She didn't think about technique or form. She simply felt and then she drew. She was bent over a large piece of Bristol board, her dark curls falling over her face as she worked. Her mother Maria bustled into the room, a tray of hot chocolate and homemade cookies in her hands. Maria wasn't a gallery owner or an art expert. She was a nurse who worked long, exhausting shifts. But she understood her daughter's heart better than anyone. She saw the way Nao's face lit up when a new idea came to her, the way her shoulders relaxed the moment a pencil touched the paper. "How's my little artist doing?" Maria asked, placing the tray gently on the corner of the desk, careful not to disturb the various spills. Naomi looked up, her brown eyes soft and a little hesitant. She pushed the board forward slightly. It was a simple drawing, but one that contained an immense, quiet power. She had captured an elderly woman sitting on a park bench, but it wasn't just a portrait. The woman's face was etched with a lifetime of stories, her hands resting in her lap were gnarled but graceful, and the faint, almost ghostly outlines of birds swirled around her, as if her memories had taken flight. Naomi had used charcoal and a single vibrant splash of ultramarine blue on the woman's scarf, a bold choice that felt both jarring and perfectly right. "It's for the school competition," Naomi said, her voice barely a whisper. I don't know if it's good enough." Maria's heart swelled. She reached out and brushed a stray curl from her daughter's forehead. "Good enough? Now it's perfect, too. It's not just a picture of someone, it's a picture of how you see the world. It's full of heart." Naomi smiled, a small, grateful curve of her lips. She looked back at her drawing, her creation. She didn't know anything about linear perspective or the Renaissance masters. She only knew that when she looked at the elderly woman in the park, she felt a profound sense of peace and history, and she had tried to put that feeling on paper. The drawing was her truth. She knew the work would be displayed at the city competition, which happened to be the very same Rising Stars show Aurelius Thorne was about to suffer through. A quiet, unassuming work of art, born of feeling and intuition, was about to collide with a world that valued nothing but cold, clinical perfection. The stage was set. The air in the community hall was thick with the scent of cheap pastries and nervous energy. Aurelius stepped through the double doors and felt a familiar wave of revulsion. The Rising Stars art show was exactly as he had envisioned. A chaotic, poorly lit space filled with proud parents and awkward children milling about. The art itself was mounted on flimsy corkboards, and the sheer volume of it was an assault on his refined sensibilities. He saw a clay bowl that looked like a collapsed bird's nest, a watercolor painting of a sad-looking dog, and a portrait in crayon so crude it felt like a personal insult to his profession. He moved through the crowd with the practiced grace of a predator, his eyes darting from one piece to the next, his lips curled into a silent, disdainful sneer. He was a shark in a wading pool, and everyone could sense his presence. A young girl, no older than 9, offered him a brochure with a shaky hand. He took it without a word, his gaze already moving on, a ghost of a shadow passing over her face. He couldn't be bothered with pleasantries. He had a schedule, and the sooner he could check this box, the sooner he could return to the sterile sanctuary of his penthouse. His patron, a woman named Genevieve Sterling who collected Impressionist works, had been quite insistent that he attend. "They say there's a real little prodigy in the mix this year," she had said with an infuriating cheerfulness. "Maybe you'll be the one to discover them." Aurelius had scoffed. True talent was not found in school cafeterias but in hushed auction houses and the quiet, hallowed halls of private studios. He was about to make a beeline for the exit when he saw it. Tucked away on a corner panel, next to a gaudy finger painting of a volcano, was the drawing of the elderly woman. His initial reaction was a familiar one: contempt. The proportions were slightly off, and the charcoal work was a little messy in places. The single jarring splash of ultramarine blue on the scarf was a particularly egregious choice. It was an amateurish mistake, a violation of color theory, a stain on an otherwise monochromatic piece. He stepped closer, his brow furrowed. But as he looked, something shifted. The lines weren't precise, no, but they were alive. The woman's face, etched with wrinkles and lines, told a story he couldn't deny. He found himself studying the drawing, his critical eye momentarily silenced by a quiet, insistent hum that emanated from the piece. The faint outlines of the swirling birds, what were they? A simple stylistic flourish? Or a profound observation on memory and the way it takes flight? A crowd of parents and students had gathered around, their whispers a low murmur. Naomi and Maria stood at the edge of the small group, their hearts pounding in their chests. Naomi's hands were clasped so tightly they were white at the knuckles. She had seen the famous critic approach, his face a grim, judgmental mask. A glimmer of hope had sparked in her, a childish, naive belief that maybe, just maybe, he would see what her mother saw, that he would see the heart in her drawing. The silence stretched on, a moment suspended in time. Aurelius finally broke the silence, his voice low and cutting. It carried a timbre that demanded attention, and everyone instinctively quieted down. "A curious piece," he began, his tone dripping with condescension. The charcoal work is undisciplined. The perspective is non-existent. And this, he said, gesturing to the ultramarine scarf with a flick of his wrist, is a crime against coherence. A child's impulse. It's a drawing of a woman, yes, but it is not art. It is a sentimental portrait, lacking any technical skill or sophisticated narrative. The artist has confused emotion with expression, a common mistake of the novice. One should never substitute a lack of skill for a glut of feeling. The words hung in the air, cold and brutal. Naomi felt them land like physical blows. Her mother put a comforting arm around her, but it did little to stop the sting of his critique. Her eyes welled with tears and she quickly turned away, her head bowed in shame. The small, hopeful flame in her heart had been extinguished. She felt a profound sense of humiliation, a raw and public rejection of the piece she had poured her truth into. Aurelius, oblivious to the emotional devastation he had wrought, simply nodded once and turned to leave. His work here was done. He had affirmed his belief that true art was a thing of rigorous intellect, not clumsy emotion. As he walked away, a man stepped forward, pushing through the now dismayed crowd. He was a different kind of presence than Aurelius, less imposing, more observant. He wore a simple tweed jacket and carried a worn leather briefcase. His name was Elias Vance, and he was a senior acquisitions consultant for the prestigious L'Art Nouveau gallery in Paris. Elias had been sent to scout for new talent, not necessarily to find a masterpiece, but to find something fresh. He had been told the same rumors as Aurelius, but he had arrived with an open mind. He stood before Naomi's drawing, his eyes scanning the piece. He didn't see the technical flaws. He saw the audacious choice of the blue scarf, a rebellious streak in an otherwise conservative palette. He saw the story in the woman's face. He saw the ghosts of memories swirling around her. He reached for his phone and took a photograph, his finger hovering over the contact for his boss, Madame Dubois. He saw not a sentimental doodle but a work of raw, unadulterated genius. He saw a future. And the price he knew was nothing. It was priceless. The journey home felt 1,000 miles long. The subway car, usually a vibrant space of people and noise, was silent and suffocating. Naomi sat with her head against the grimy window, watching the blur of the city go by. The faces of the passengers, their lives a mystery, passed in and out of her vision, but she saw only one face, Aurelius Thorne's. She heard only one voice, his. His words, sharp and final, echoed in her mind. A crime against coherence. Lacking any technical skill. Confused emotion with expression. The drawing, which had once felt so full of her truth, now felt like a lie. She had put so much of herself into it, and he had seen nothing but a clumsy, sentimental mess. The worst part was the small, cold feeling of agreement that had begun to creep into her heart. Maybe he was right. Maybe she wasn't an artist after all. Maria sat beside her, her hand resting on her daughter's knee. She could feel the tremors of her daughter's silent heartbreak. Maria's own cheeks were still hot with shame and fury. She had wanted to lash out at the man, to scream at him for his cruelty, but his cold, authoritative presence had silenced her. Who was she, a nurse from the Bronx, to argue with a man who was the final word on all things art? But as she watched her daughter wilt, her motherly rage began to burn hotter than any shame. She saw the drawing not as a piece of art to be judged, but as an extension of her child's soul, and he had stomped all over it without a second thought. She wished she could go back in time, pull the drawing from the wall and protect it from his venomous critique. But it was too late. The damage was done. Back in his penthouse, Aurelius was enjoying a single malt scotch, the amber liquid swirling in the crystal glass. The afternoon's ordeal was behind him, and he felt a profound sense of satisfaction. He had done his duty. He had spoken the truth, no matter how unpleasant it was for the sentimental parents and their misguided children. He had protected the sanctity of art from the scourge of amateurism. He picked up his phone to write a note to Genevieve Sterling. He would tell her that her prodigy was nothing more than a passing phase, a fleeting moment of misplaced hope. His job was to be the sword of truth, and he had swung it with precision. But as he typed, a phantom image flashed in his mind, the splash of ultramarine blue on the gray scarf. It was illogical, absurd. Why had that detail stuck with him? He had dismissed it as a crime against coherence, but something about its very audacity, its defiance of all the rules he held dear, nagged at him. He shook his head, a small involuntary movement, and pushed the thought away. It was meaningless. A flaw was a flaw, no matter how memorable. Across town, in the sleek, minimalist offices of L'Art Nouveau, Elias Vance was on a video call with Madame Dubois, the gallery's formidable director. Madame Dubois was a woman of impeccable taste and shrewd business sense. She wore her age like a fine cloak, her silver hair pulled back in a severe bun, her eyes missing nothing. "Elias, you're sure about this?" she asked, her French accent clipped and precise. "You say this is a school competition piece?" "Yes, madam," Elias said, his voice brimming with a quiet certainty. "But you must see it. It is not just a drawing. It is a story. Look at the lines on the woman's face. They are not rendered with textbook perfection, but they speak of a life lived. And the birds are genius. It is not a literal rendering. It is the artist's feeling, her soul made visible." He held up his phone, showing her the photograph he had taken. Madame Dubois stared at the image, her expression unreadable. Elias waited, his heart thumping in his chest. He had gone out on a limb with this. The gallery had a reputation to maintain, a legacy of supporting only the most refined and established artists. To invest in a child's work was unprecedented, bordering on insanity. He knew the risk, but he also knew what he had seen. Madame Dubois leaned closer to her screen, her eyes narrowing as she studied the drawing. She saw the same things Elias had: the emotional depth, the intuitive use of line, and the bold, defiant splash of color. She didn't see a lack of skill, she saw a total lack of concern for pre-established rules. She saw a mind that wasn't trying to copy the world, but to express its own unique perspective of it. This was the raw, unadulterated genius that the modern art world so desperately needed. She looked at Elias, a small, knowing smile on her lips. "It is not perfect, no," she said, her voice a low purr. "But perfection is a cage, and this child has wings. We will acquire it, Elias, whatever the cost." Elias felt a wave of relief so powerful it almost knocked him over. "Madam, I will arrange it at once. I have the contact information from the school's website." The call ended, and Elias immediately began to work. He drafted a formal offer, a document that detailed the gallery's interest in the piece. He knew the protocol. He was to contact the student's guardian and make the offer discreetly, a simple, official business transaction. But as he typed out the numbers, a seven-figure sum that would be a down payment on a larger deal, he knew this was far more than a simple transaction. This was a seismic event, a quiet earthquake that was about to shake the very foundations of the art world. He found Maria Johnson's email address, attached the official offer, and hit send. Back in her living room, Maria and Naomi sat in silence, the air thick with unspoken sorrow. Naomi had put her sketchbook away, her pencils now scattered on the desk like useless artifacts. The light was fading outside, casting long shadows across the room. The sudden chime of her phone startled Maria. An email. She opened it, her eyes scanning the formal language. Her breath hitched. She read it again, her mind trying to process the words. The number was a mistake. It had to be a mistake. She looked at her daughter, her heart breaking for her, and then she looked back at the screen. The words swam before her eyes. A seven-figure offer for the immediate acquisition of the artwork. She wanted to laugh, to cry, to scream. The man who had insulted her daughter's art, who had called it a worthless failure, was about to be proven wrong in the most spectacular way possible. Her hands trembling, she handed the phone to Naomi. The girl's eyes widened, then filled with a new kind of tears, not of shame but of shock and disbelief. A tiny, fragile seed of hope began to bloom in her heart again, this time with the quiet certainty that what she felt was real, and what he said didn't matter at all. Maria and Naomi stared at the email on the phone screen as if it were a coded message from another galaxy. The numbers blurred into an impossible figure, a dizzying sequence of zeros that felt as detached from their reality as the stars. A seven-figure offer. It was a sum so immense, so utterly out of the context of their daily lives, that it felt like a cruel joke. Maria's mind, which usually ran on the practical tracks of grocery lists, bills, and work schedules, simply couldn't process it. She handed the phone back to Naomi, her hands shaking. "Naomi, honey, are you seeing this right? Is this real?" Maria's voice was a soft, disbelieving whisper. Naomi took the phone, her thumb scrolling slowly as if she could find a hidden caveat, a secret message that would reveal the email was for someone else. but the words were clear. The letterhead was from a legitimate gallery. The signature was from a senior acquisitions consultant. And the amount, it was still there in bold, undeniable print. The tears that had welled in her eyes earlier had dried, replaced by a profound and bewildering shock. She felt a strange mix of emotions, a fierce sense of vindication, a fragile seed of hope, and a deep, unsettling fear. This wasn't just a validation of her art, it was an invitation into a world that felt alien and dangerous, the very world that had just so brutally rejected her. I don't know, Mama, Naomi said, her voice small. Maybe it's a mistake. Maria, ever the nurse and problem solver, took a deep, steadying breath. A mistake? Maybe. But we can't just ignore it. We have to call. Right now. We have to find out what this is. Naomi's stomach tightened into a knot. She didn't want to call. She wanted to retreat back into the safety of her room, back to the simple act of drawing for no one but herself. But she knew her mother was right. They had to know. Maria found the number for L'Art Nouveau on the gallery's website and dialed it, her hand still trembling slightly. The phone rang once, twice, and then a smooth, professional voice answered in a perfect, lilting French accent. Maria, stumbling over her words, asked to speak with Elias Vance. After a moment on hold, a man's voice, calm and kind, came on the line. This is Elias Vance. To whom am I speaking? Mr. Vance, my name is Maria Johnson. I'm the mother of Naomi Johnson. We received an email from you regarding her drawing. There was a pause on the other end, and then Elias's voice, now warm and welcoming, filled the line. Ah, yes, Mrs. Johnson. I was hoping you would call. Thank you for reaching out. The offer is genuine. My gallery, L'Art Nouveau, is profoundly interested in your daughter's work. Maria held the phone away from her ear for a moment, looking at Naomi with wide eyes. It was real. The words had settled it. The shock was starting to give way to a cautious, exhilarating joy. Mr. Vance, I'm sorry, but we're just a little confused. We were just at the art show and a critic, a very famous critic, said that the piece was, well, that it wasn't good. Elias chuckled, a low, knowing sound. Ah, yes, I believe I was there. I heard Mr. Thorne's comments. But you must understand, Mrs. Johnson, his perspective is, let's just say, highly traditional. He sees art as a thing of the past. My gallery, on the other hand, is looking for the future. Your daughter's drawing, it is not perfect. It is not trying to be. It is raw, it is honest, and it is brave. The way she used that one splash of color, it's a defiance. A brilliant, powerful defiance. We see not the mistakes but the genius. That is why we are making this offer. We believe she is a true visionary. Naomi, listening to her mother's end of the conversation, felt her throat tighten. The words were so different from Aurelius's. They were a balm to her wounded spirit. He saw the very things that the critic had condemned as flaws and called them strengths. The quiet, timid hope that had bloomed in her heart now felt like a full-throated roar. She was right. Her truth was valid. The conversation continued for another 20 minutes. Elias explained the offer in detail, including the seven-figure sum that was just a baseline, with an additional sum to be placed in an educational trust fund for Naomi. He also explained the plan to display the piece, to market her as a new talent, and to showcase her in a solo exhibition in Paris in the coming year. He was kind, patient, and seemed to genuinely admire her work. When Maria hung up, a long, quiet moment passed between them. Well, Maria said, a small, tearful laugh escaping her lips. It looks like you're going to be a star, my little artist. She wrapped her daughter in a tight embrace, and this time the tears that streamed down Naomi's face were a mix of relief, disbelief, and a thrilling, terrifying excitement. Later that evening the news began to spread. The art world, a tightly knit community built on gossip and whispered secrets, was set ablaze. First, it was a blog post from a small, independent art journalist who had been at the show. The article, titled "The Art World's Ultimate Reversal, A Child's Folly Fetches Millions," detailed the public humiliation of Aurelius Thorne and the unprecedented offer from L'Art Nouveau. Then the major art news sites picked it up. An international wire service ran a story with the headline, "Anonymous Teen Artist Shakes Up Art World with Unprecedented Deal." Soon it was everywhere. The image of the elderly woman with the solitary blue scarf began to circulate on social media, a symbol of defiance and a rebuke to the establishment. Aurelius Thorne was at his desk, working on a final edit of his column, when the first email from a colleague arrived. The subject line was simply, "Did you see?" He opened it and stared at the link to the art blog. He read the article, his face draining of color with each sentence. He read about the seven-figure sum. He read about the French gallery. He read the quotes from the anonymous source, who recounted his very own words, his cutting, damning critique. His stomach, which was never troubled by his work, began to churn with a furious, nauseous disbelief. This was impossible. A child's drawing? The one he had so confidently dismissed? For millions? It was a farce, a cheap publicity stunt. But as he clicked on more links, saw more headlines, and saw the image of the drawing, he knew it wasn't. The art world was talking. They were laughing. At him. His carefully constructed reputation, his years of intellectual arrogance, his authority, it was all being dismantled in a single public moment of brutal, undeniable humiliation. His cold, clinical world had just been invaded by the very thing he despised, human chaos. He slammed his laptop shut, the sound echoing through the sterile silence of his penthouse. The war had just begun. The world, for Naomi and Maria, fractured into two distinct realities. There was life before the email, a familiar, predictable rhythm of school and work and quiet evenings spent drawing. Then there was life after, a chaotic maelstrom of ringing phones and flashing cameras and a constant, disorienting sense of being watched. The day after the story broke, their humble apartment building was swarmed by reporters. They were a flock of hungry birds, their cameras and microphones a silent, aggressive chorus of demands. "Naomi, can you comment on the offer? Mrs. Johnson, how does it feel to have a millionaire in your family? Is this drawing a message to the art establishment?" Maria, with a fierce protectiveness that felt as powerful as any suit of armor, became the gatekeeper. She taped a sign to their front door, a no comment, "Leave us alone," and unplugged the landline. Her cell phone, however, was a relentless source of anxiety, buzzing with calls and texts from old friends, distant relatives, and strangers all wanting a piece of the story. She felt like a human shield, standing between her daughter and the insatiable curiosity of the world. Naomi, for her part, retreated. The joyful, uninhibited act of drawing had been replaced by a suffocating sense of performance. She looked at her sketchbooks now not as a personal refuge, but as potential exhibits, each line and color a subject for public scrutiny. The feeling of vindication was still there, a warm ember in her heart, but it was being smothered by the cold ash of fame. The drawing of the elderly woman was no longer just her truth, it was a phenomenon, a commodity, a weapon in a war she hadn't even known she was fighting. The thought of picking up a pencil felt alien, like she was being asked to perform a magic trick on demand, under the cruel glare of a spotlight. Elias Vance, meanwhile, was doing his best to manage the media onslaught from a distance. He had deliberately kept the identity of the artist a secret to give her family time to process everything, but the art world was too small and too fast for secrets. The leak had been inevitable. He called Maria again, his voice apologetic. "I am so sorry, Mrs. Johnson. We tried to control the story, but it's out now. The only thing we can do is let them have their moment and then it will die down. For now, please stay inside. Don't answer any questions. I've reached out to a publicist who specializes in this sort of thing, and she can help you navigate it. In the meantime, the offer remains on the table. We're working on the final paperwork now, and we'd like to arrange your flights to Paris next week." Naomi watched her mother on the phone, the word Paris hanging in the air. The idea felt so impossibly distant, a dream from a different life. She wasn't a girl who went to Paris. She was a girl who took the subway and drew in her room. This new reality felt like a borrowed suit, one that didn't quite fit, and she was terrified of what would happen when she was finally forced to put it on. Maria hung up, her face a mixture of exhaustion and fierce determination. "He said to ignore them," she said to Naomi, her voice firm, "and that we're going to Paris. You and me. This isn't a mistake, baby. It's real. And we're going to do this. Together." Meanwhile, across town, Aurelius Thorne was enduring a different kind of siege. His penthouse, usually a sanctuary of controlled perfection, had become a gilded cage. He had turned off all his phones and disconnected his internet. The silence, however, was worse than the noise. It was a silence filled with the phantom ringing of his phone, the imagined chatter of the art world, and the echo of his own words, now a public humiliation. He couldn't escape the image of the drawing, the single brilliant flash of blue that had so thoroughly undone him. It haunted him. His Rothko, usually a soothing presence of pure color, now felt like a taunt, a crude block of red that had none of the defiant life of the ultramarine blue. The Tingley sculpture, a work of mechanical perfection, now seemed to tremble in mocking laughter. His carefully constructed life of intellectual superiority was crumbling around him. The art world, which had once treated his pronouncements as gospel, was now buzzing with a new narrative. He was no longer the brilliant, feared critic. He was the man who had failed to recognize genius. He was the dinosaur, the relic, the gatekeeper who had been outmaneuvered by a 13-year-old girl and a French gallery with an eye for the future. He paced his apartment, a restless, caged animal. He had to do something. He couldn't simply let this stand. His reputation was his lifeblood. He had to reclaim his authority, to somehow bend this narrative back in his favor. He had a moment of terrible clarity. He had to see the girl. He had to meet her. Not to apologize, not to offer praise. He needed to understand her. He needed to find the source of this seismic event that had undone him, to see if he could find a way to expose the entire thing as a fleeting fad, a moment of fleeting sentimentality that would eventually be forgotten. He would go to her not as a critic but as a man who needed answers. He would go and he would put an end to this farce once and for all. He pulled his still disconnected phone from a drawer and, with a grim determination, began to formulate a plan. He would not be defeated by a child's drawing. He was Aurelius Thorne and he was going to win. The unfamiliar streets felt like a different city altogether. Aurelius had taken a car, but the driver, who was used to the well-manicured grids of Midtown, seemed as lost as he felt. The brownstones here were a patchwork of brick and stucco, their front stoops alive with children playing and families talking. It was a world of noise and life, and it felt aggressively, uncomfortably real. Aurelius clutched his briefcase, a worn leather accessory that suddenly felt as out of place as he did. He had called ahead, of course. A simple message left on Maria Johnson's answering machine, his voice dripping with its usual cold authority. Mr. Aurelius Thorne, I am reaching out to discuss the acquisition of your daughter's work. He hadn't asked permission. He had simply announced his arrival, expecting her to be grateful for the audience. He found the correct building, a 4-story walk-up with peeling paint and an air of tired endurance. He was a beacon of bespoke tailoring and polished leather in a sea of worn sneakers and t-shirts. He took the stairs, each step a protest against the long climb. When he reached the 4th floor, the numbers on the door were smudged but legible. He knocked, his knuckles making a sharp foreign sound against the thin wood. He was a man who was used to doors opening for him, to people welcoming him into their lives and studios. But the door opened just a crack and a cautious eye peered out. Maria Johnson's face, usually so warm and open, was guarded and wary. She looked at him for a long moment, a silent interrogation. The man from the art show. The man who had made her daughter cry. Her arm was a protective barrier across the door, and her stance was one of unwavering defense. Mr. Thorne, she said, her voice cool and low. I wasn't expecting you to come in person. I am a man who prefers to speak face to face, Mrs. Johnson, he said, his voice as smooth and sterile as a surgical instrument. I believe there are circumstances we need to discuss regarding this rather bewildering turn of events. He pushed the door slightly, a silent demand for entry. Maria did not move. There's nothing to discuss. The gallery has made an offer and we've accepted it. With all due respect, Aurelius began, his voice taking on a condescending edge, a child should not be making business decisions that are clearly beyond her comprehension. This gallery, L'Art Nouveau, they are a respectable institution, but this is a circus. They are capitalizing on a moment of sensationalism. They are exploiting her talent, or rather, the illusion of her talent. At the sound of his voice, Naomi had come to the door, her presence a quiet, defiant protest. She was a different girl than the one who had stood in the art show, head bowed in shame. The shock and sadness had been replaced by a quiet, simmering anger. This man was not just insulting her work anymore. He was insulting her mother, her family, and the people who had seen her truth. They're not exploiting me, Naomi said, her voice small but firm. They see the art. Aurelius looked at her, a flicker of something close to surprise in his eyes. He had expected to see a cowering child, not one with a fire in her gaze. He smiled, a thin, patronizing curl of his lips. "My dear, they see the story. The sentimental narrative. They see a commodity. I see what you drew. And it's still what I said it was." Naomi took a deep breath. She looked at the man who had the power to make or break careers, and for the first time she saw not an expert, but a man trapped by his own narrow vision. "You didn't see it," she said, her voice rising with a quiet passion. "You didn't see the woman who sits on that bench every day. You didn't see the way she feeds the birds and how they swirl around her like she's the center of the world. You didn't see her history in the lines on her face. You saw a mistake." "The blue scarf was a mistake," Aurelius stated, his voice a final, unyielding wall. "A jarring, childish misstep. It had no place in the piece." Naomi looked at him, and then, in a moment of pure, uninhibited courage, she looked at the man, the millionaire, the feared art critic, and she spoke her truth. "The blue scarf is the only thing that matters," she said, her voice now a powerful and resonant declaration. "It's the color of the sky on the day she met her husband. It's the color of his eyes. It's the one thing that still shines, the one memory that hasn't faded away. It's not a mistake. It's the point." Aurelius stared at her, his face a mask of utter shock. He had no response to this. He was a man of logic and history, of technique and form, and she had just responded with a profound and painful truth he couldn't comprehend. He looked at the girl, no longer a child, no longer just a naive artist, but a force of nature. He had come here to win, to discredit her and the gallery, but he had just been humbled by the very thing he sought to crush. He had seen the flaw and missed the meaning. He took a step back, his face pale with a mix of fury and bewildered defeat. He gave a curt nod to Maria, who still stood at the door like a silent sentinel. Without another word, he turned and descended the stairs, leaving the small apartment and its powerful truths behind. He had not won. He had lost, not to a gallery or a publicist, but to a 13-year-old girl who understood art in a way he had forgotten how. The flight was a blurry, surreal sequence of events. For Naomi and Maria, who had only ever traveled by bus or subway, the sensation of hurtling through the clouds in a pressurized cabin felt like a dream. They watched the patchwork quilt of continents and oceans pass beneath them, a silent, breathtaking movie playing outside their window. Maria held her daughter's hand, her thumb tracing small, reassuring circles on Naomi's palm. She had spent the last week in a whirlwind of legal documents and frantic phone calls, but now, suspended between two worlds, she felt a quiet peace. The old life, with its stress and struggles, was far below them, and the new one, with its dizzying possibilities, awaited them on the other side of the Atlantic. Paris was not just a destination, it was a sensory explosion. The air was different, a cool, slightly damp mix of exhaust fumes and freshly baked bread. The city was a canvas of its own, a masterpiece of cobblestone streets and Haussmannian architecture, with the Eiffel Tower rising in the distance like a skeletal sentinel. Elias Vance met them at the airport, his kind face and warm smile a welcome island of familiarity in a sea of foreign sounds and signs. He had a car waiting for them, a sleek black sedan that smelled of leather and expensive perfume. As they drove through the city, Naomi's eyes were wide with a silent, breathless wonder. She saw people huddled in cafes, their laughter echoing onto the streets, and artists with easels set up by the river, painting the city's iconic bridges. Their hotel was a work of art in itself. It was a place of hushed elegance, with marble floors that gleamed like polished ice and a concierge who spoke to them in a soft, musical voice. Their suite was as big as their entire apartment, with a balcony that overlooked a courtyard garden. Naomi walked to the balcony door and pushed it open, stepping out into the cool evening air. The city lights twinkled below her, 1,000 diamonds scattered across a velvet cloth. For a moment she felt a pang of guilt, a sense that she didn't belong here, that this was all a cosmic mistake. But then she felt her mother's hand on her shoulder, and she looked back to see Maria's face, softened by the ambient light, her eyes full of a love so profound it felt like a tangible force. "This is real now," Maria whispered. "And you deserve every single bit of it." The next day they went to L'Art Nouveau. The gallery was nestled on a quiet street, its heavy oak doors and discreet brass plaque giving it a timeless, almost sacred feel. Inside, the space was a symphony of light and stillness. The ceilings were high, the walls were a gentle cream color, and the art on display was breathtaking. Naomi walked through the rooms, her mind a whirlwind of impressions. She saw works that had once been only names in a book, now here in the flesh. The reverence in the air was palpable. It was a place where art was not just displayed but worshipped. Elias met them in the main hall and led them to a private office. Madame Dubois was waiting for them. She rose as they entered, a small woman with an imposing presence. Her eyes were sharp and intelligent, and she looked at Naomi with a gaze that seemed to see into her soul. "Naomi," she said, her French accent still present but her tone warm. "It is an honor to meet you." Naomi's heart hammered in her chest, but she managed a small, nervous smile. "Elias told me about the other critic," Madame Dubois said, her eyes twinkling with a shared amusement. "He is a man who sees only the box. We, my dear, see the world outside of it. Come." She gestured for them to follow her, and she led them into a small, private viewing room. And there it was. Naomi's drawing. It was mounted on a wall all its own, under a single perfect spotlight that illuminated every line, every smudge of charcoal. The ultramarine blue of the scarf, once a jarring splash, now seemed to pulse with a life of its own, a vibrant, beating heart in the center of the piece. It was framed in a simple, elegant dark wood, which gave it a weight and importance she had never imagined possible. It wasn't just a drawing from a school art show anymore. It was art. "It is a masterpiece," Madame Dubois said simply, her voice low with genuine admiration. "You did not draw what you saw. You drew what you felt. You gave the invisible a form. The sadness, the joy, the memories, they are all there, swirling like the birds. That," she said, looking from Naomi to the drawing, "is the truest form of art there is." Tears pricked at Naomi's eyes, but they were not tears of pain or shame. They were tears of pure, unadulterated recognition. This woman, this famous gallery owner, understood. She didn't see a mistake. She saw the point. She saw the love. She saw the truth. All the humiliation, all the doubt, all the fear of the last few weeks seemed to dissolve in that single beautiful moment. For the first time since the art show, she felt a powerful, undeniable urge to draw again. She wanted to create, not to prove anyone wrong, but to express the overwhelming, beautiful complexity of her own heart. She had found her home. The months that followed were a whirlwind of creativity and discovery for Naomi. Paris, once a distant, mythical city, became her second home. She and her mother stayed in a small, charming apartment near the gallery, a place that, unlike the sterile perfection of Aurelius Thorne's penthouse, felt lived in and loved. Maria found a part-time job at a local hospital, her nursing skills a universal language of care, and Naomi enrolled in a small, private art academy where she was not just accepted but celebrated. The academy was a different world from her public school's art program. Here, the teachers were not gatekeepers but facilitators, encouraging her to explore her unique style rather than conform to rigid, technical rules. She learned about color theory, about composition, about the history of art, but she did so with a new understanding, that these were not laws to be obeyed, but tools to be used in the service of her own truth. The drawing of the elderly woman, now a symbol of quiet rebellion and genuine emotion, was the centerpiece of her solo exhibition. The show, titled The Blue Scarf, was set to open at L'Art Nouveau, and the art world was buzzing with anticipation. The story of the defiant teenager and the humbled critic had become a legend, a modern fable of genius triumphing over arrogance. But for Naomi, the exhibition was about more than revenge or public victory. It was about sharing her heart with the world. She had filled the gallery with new work, pieces that explored her life in a new city, the faces of the people she met, the small, quiet moments that had moved her. There were portraits of her mother laughing, of Elias Vance deep in thought, of the baker who gave her extra croissants, all rendered with her signature style, a mix of raw, energetic lines and a single, surprising burst of color that illuminated the piece's emotional core. She wasn't just drawing what she saw, she was drawing what she felt. Meanwhile, back in New York, Aurelius Thorne was enduring a slow, excruciating professional death. The world he had so meticulously controlled had turned its back on him. His column, once the most feared and respected voice in the industry, was now a public joke. No one wanted his opinion, no one sought his praise, and no one invited him to the exclusive hushed events he had once commanded. He was a ghost in his own city. The public humiliation had done more than damage his reputation. It had shattered his very belief system. He had always seen art as a logical, predictable progression of skill, and Naomi's success had proven him fundamentally wrong. She had broken his rules and succeeded because of it. He would walk through galleries he once frequented, and he would hear the whispered conversations, the quick glances in his direction, and he would feel the cold judgment of a world that had moved on without him. His last column, a desperate attempt to reclaim his authority by discrediting L'Art Nouveau as an opportunistic gallery, was met with a chorus of indifference and a wave of quiet mockery. He was no longer the brilliant arbiter of taste. He was simply a relic, a man who had failed to see the future because he was so busy clinging to the past. The night of the exhibition, L'Art Nouveau was packed. Journalists, collectors, and art lovers from all over the world filled the space, their chatter a low, excited hum. Madame Dubois and Elias stood on either side of Naomi, their faces alight with pride. When the doors finally opened, the crowds poured in. They didn't just look at the art, they felt it. The drawing of the elderly woman, with its vibrant splash of blue, seemed to radiate a silent, profound power. People stood before it for long moments, a quiet reverence in their eyes. They had read the story and now they saw the proof. They saw the truth in a work that an established critic had called a mistake, and it was a powerful, unforgettable lesson. Naomi moved through the crowd, a sense of peace settling over her. She was no longer afraid of the spotlight. She saw people looking at her new drawings, their faces filled with the same sense of recognition that she had once seen on her mother's. She was not just a symbol of defiance, she was an artist and she was home. She caught a glimpse of a woman who had a faint, faded tattoo of a bird on her wrist, a quiet acknowledgement of the swirling memories in the original drawing. The art had found its audience, and its truth had resonated in a way she never could have imagined. The exhibition was a resounding success, and the blue scarf was a cultural moment, a quiet revolution that reminded the art world that true genius isn't about rigid technique but about a profound and authentic way of seeing the world. The final chapter of Aurelius Thorne's story was a quiet one, a life lived in the shadows of his own reputation, a man who had chosen to see a flaw and missed the point. Naomi's story, however, had just begun. Her life was no longer defined by a single drawing or a single act of public humiliation. It was defined by the journey, the discovery, and the uninhibited joy of a young girl who, with a single audacious splash of color, had found her voice and changed the world around her, one brushstroke at a time. Dear viewer, if you've watched up to this point, thank you for your support. I have a small request. If you enjoy my stories, you can subscribe to the channel, and don't hesitate to share your thoughts about the stories in the comments. Enjoy watching. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like the video.